So I wanted to prove to you that I was actually there and I didn't steal other people's photos. That's me in the center looking really dazed because it was 5 o'clock in the morning when we caught our bus. One of 2,800 buses that went into the city of Washington to plague the city with mostly women, but men and kids who were there to really push back after the inauguration of Donald Trump. The hats were significant because when we went through the borders, everyone who had their hat on was stopped and took about 20 to 25 minutes. Everyone who went through without their hat sailed right through. So we learned very quickly that appearances were in fact everything. As I said on the title here, this was really an extraordinary day. It really was one day in one world and one uprising, because you will see as the slides progress that we had folks in about 120 countries who were marching in various places throughout their different cities. I stayed with some friends in West Virginia, which was the weirdest experience ever, and that was what got me through the border, because I honestly got to answer the question by saying I'm going to West Virginia. This is the second slide. One of the things that was most important for us as we walked the 2.5 miles from where the buses were parked to the periphery downtown, we went through residential streets, and at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, people came out on their stoops. They all had campaign-like signs like this in their lawns, and they were so important because these people opened their arms to us. And there were thousands of us, as you can see. This was a living crowd, and the constant din of this was so loud that when I tried to do an interview live back in Victoria during the march, they could not hear me because of the background sound. This was a sound as if you were standing on top of a subway station that was running live, and it was just, it almost went through your soul. And though there was a crowd of 1.3 million people in Washington, D.C., every single person was an individual with a message of hope. And you'll see a few of these through the presentation. These were people who deliberately went out of the way to show how different they were from one another, and yet they came for the single purpose of showing that they were going to be resistors. And they came, and there was singing, and there was music, because there was joy, and there was safety. And although I've never been in a crowd of that many people, and you'll see some pictures to show you how vast it was, not a single time did I feel afraid, and not a single time did I have any fear that anything was going to happen that wasn't intended to. And these people came as one, and they came and they stood as individuals, and they talked about their resilience, and they talked about the fact that they've been holding these signs for 50 years and getting damn tired of it, but the underlying message from that was exactly what's there. Nevertheless, every single person there said, I will continue to persist. We were so many people, and yet the unifying color obviously was pink, and we really were there as one unit, as one voice, as one mind. And though every picture you took, you saw difference and you saw diversity, you saw the pink message, which was, we are not going away. The overwhelming chance of, welcome to your first day, Mr. Trump, this is going to be for the next 4 years, and it has continued to do this. There was a lot of sense around understanding history, around demonstrating respect for the people who fought for decades and decades and decades. And the personal stories that were there, that were shown on each of the signs, were the ones that really cut to your heart. Because you heard what they were saying, and you saw them coming out and telling their own individual stories and saying, I am brave, you can be too. And I've been brave throughout my entire life, and I've taught that to my children, and they're here today too. One street was designated for this. There were 17 avenues that were full of people for 9 miles. We were supposed to end up in one place. We ended up in front of the White House. That was not without notice for the police that were there. But even when we had strife, we had people like this who were being pushed. This woman was 94 years old. She was being pushed by her granddaughter, holding this sign. And she came out of her nursing home to be part of this march. It was an overwhelming crowd, as you can imagine. Unbelievable to imagine moving in a river of people like this who all together were there to create a moment in time. This is an experience that every person who was at this march will never forget, because what it led to ultimately was this sense of an overwhelming sense of belonging. So many people there who ended up in each other's arms because it was important to be part of something you could feel as well as think. And this was a scene that was repeated over and over and over again. This was about courage. This was about exposure. This was about telling stories around the world. And there were marches in Poland. This one's in Poland, where there were 60,000 people. There were marches in Germany, in England, in France, in Southern Africa, in Alaska, in Antarctica, and all sorts of different places. And what was absolutely critically important, the common theme among all of them, was that we are not going to let you turn back a clock. We have fought for decades for these rights. We are all going to come to the same table and show you that we will never, never, never go away. And even when we're in places where you can't see us, we will be there with the media, with social media, with fake media, with acceptable media, and we will always be with messages of hope and of commitment and of solidarity, and of the belief that it is the people ultimately who will be the conscience of the decision makers, and will always be there to say, this is not okay, and you have to return us to a place where we have the equality that we fought for decades. Throughout the world, we saw these types of pictures. These are just a couple. There's just two more. And what we took from this was, regardless of the language, regardless of the culture, regardless of the context, the single message that came through was one of resistance and hope and commitment and patience and an understanding that it might be a long road, but it was a road we were all willing to go down together. And one of the things I think that was, on a personal level, so profound for me was being able to be in a place where you had significant racial division in Washington, D.C., and you saw it at every corner. It was a weird thing. You had a National Guard who were kept from the day before the inauguration. There were 10,100 National Guardsmen in the city. And, you know, weirdly, the black guys wore the pink hats, took the Canadian pins, opened their arms, hugged and told jokes. And you know what? The white guys didn't. It was the weirdest experience as a Canadian coming into the country. And more profound, I think, than the crowds were the examples we had where there were people who were alone and still they came out. There were people who were in hospitals and still they came out. They needed to demonstrate on a very personal level that this was a fight they were not going to relinquish. And this, for me, was the telling point that everyone left with. We will march until hell freezes over, and then we will march on the ice. We had more than 1 million people in Washington. And in a million people, we knew that there was hope and everything was possible.